here to give you some comparison and contrast between the other two horses that we've just showed you. Okay? In this horse, we're just going to go through him some general overall conformation about him, and then we also will track this horse so you can appreciate some of the differences of the way that this horse is put together and the way he's going to track and move as compared to the other two other horses that we just went through. Now this horse, you can see he overall is a bit different. The basic conformation factors apply to him, but he's going to be put together somewhat different than the other two horses. If you want to look at his head, he does not have as what you might say is breedy a head. He's a little bit long from his eye to his muzzle, still adequate in his eye, has a little bit more thickness through here, and just not quite as overall attractive a head as the previous two horses we showed you. Now if you look over at his neck, I think this horse has a very good neck. He's clean in his throat latch, it's quite long, and we have no problems at all with this horse's neck. It still does tie in quite good between his front legs. However, where you start to see some differences in this horse is the makeup of his shoulder and the makeup of his hip, and we'll also show you how his front legs are. This horse is a bit more upright in his shoulder. If you look at the distance here and the distance here, this distance is not as long as what you saw in the previous two horses, and he is much more upright in his shoulder, and you'll really see the effects of that as we track this horse out and as we get him to move. If you look down through the anatomy or the side anatomy of his front leg, we still have a long forearm, a short cannon. He's a little bit long in his feet, maybe he needs to be reset. However, all of that from the side is still quite adequate. However, if you move on back from the horse, looking at him from the side, you'll see that falls in with this shoulder that he probably has a longer back, okay? And we want the back to be longer than the underline, and this horse comes a little bit more close to being more even about those two ratios, in contrast to what we would prefer for the back to be shorter than the underline. So, and this is also indicative of a horse that is more upright in his shoulder and his withers are set more forward. As we move back through this horse's hip, okay, he has a nice turn, he's relatively long in his hip, however his hind leg has a little bit more set to his hock, is not as correctly angled on this hind leg as what we would like to see in comparison to the previous two horses that you saw. Now if we would turn and look at him from the front, you'll see some differences in the conformation of this horse's front legs. Okay, the previous horses were really quite straight as you walk down them, not absolutely perfect as no horse is, but they were relatively straight. As you look down through this horse's front legs, you can see that his knees are somewhat set out to the outside, especially on the left leg, and you'll see it even greater as we track and move this horse, that he does come down and he is a bit pigeon-toed in front. You can see here through his foot, if you look down through the center, is a little bit twisted and set to the outside, and he's not down here quite as true and straight as we would like the horse to be. In addition, he's not quite as clean in his legs and his joints as the previous horses. He does have a bit of a splint here, a little bit of puffiness and thickness in through his joints. In addition, especially compared to the sorrel horse, he's a little bit heavier in his bone, not quite as refined as a horse, giving him, as far as looking at his overall quality and compared to either of the other two horses. This horse here is a really good example of, again, as Libby would say, how form will depict his function. As we watch him track around here, if you focus first on the front half of this horse with his front leg, we talked about that he had a straighter, more upstanding, was more upright in his shoulder. Okay? If you look how he tracks out and moves with his front leg, this horse has a lot of bend with his front leg. As some of our folks would say, shows you quite a bit of knee, is more up and down in his motion, and is trotting out of his leg rather than his shoulder. Okay? Those horses that we previously showed you that had more slope to their shoulder really reached and swung more from their shoulder and did not have quite as much bend with that front leg. As you watch him come around, you can also see that this horse does turn in significantly with his front feet and is fairly pigeon-toed. Okay? If you look at his hind leg though, with the set to his hock and that, this horse really still does track up fairly well with his hind leg. And steps up fairly close between the outside foot or his hind foot and his front foot in his tracks, but he's very short in front. We also, another way to describe him is say that he's short and he's fairly quick, which you can see to a greater extent even when she pushes him into that long trot. okay? After he gets done playing here just a bit, we'll push him into his lope. Okay. And sometimes they say that things really come out a little bit more as you increase the gait, okay? As you watch this horse slope around, you can see that he is, has quite a bit of bend in that front leg, takes a very short stride with his front leg, lifts that knee up and throws it out. However, where we like him is if you look back through his hock, he has a lot of swing to his hock reaches up fairly forward and stays underneath himself quite well, okay? So we would prefer the horse to be a little bit flatter in front, but he's just not going to be able to do that because of the anatomy and the conformation of the way his front leg is, or excuse me, the way his shoulder is.